Dawn breaks over the Eurotas Valley, cold enough to sting bare skin, and a line of boys stands silently where warmth should matter more than pride. Their hair is cropped, their feet are bare, and their eyes already know not to wander. This is not a place for hesitation, and you probably wouldn't survive the first year. The Agoge begins not with weapons, but with exposure to hunger, to fear, to being watched, and every sensation is meant to carve obedience into muscle and bone. Before a shield is ever lifted. Established formally in the reforms attributed to Lycurgus, the Agoge was less a school than a state-controlled system of human shaping. After the earthquake of 464 BCE, when Helot revolts threatened Sparta's existence, this system proved its political purpose. Discipline was not just moral, it was existential. Boys were removed from households at age 7, reorganized into herds, and taught that survival depended on conformity. In battle terms, this early conditioning created men who did not break ranks when chaos surged, a trait famously displayed at Thermopylae in 480 BCE, where coordinated endurance mattered more than individual valor. The strength of this upbringing lay in predictability. Soldiers trained from childhood to obey orders reflexively could maintain tight formation under pressure, making the Spartan phalanx unusually stable compared to other Greek forces like the more flexible Athenian citizen militias. Yet this rigidity was also a weakness. When conditions demanded adaptation, as at Leuctra in 371 BCE, the same discipline that once ensured cohesion limited creative response. The skills learned here were subtle but essential: silent communication, spatial awareness within ranks, and emotional restraint. A lesser-known fact often overlooked is that boys were encouraged to steal food, not to promote cunning, but to punish failure if caught, reinforcing accountability rather than success. Modern academic debate still questions whether the Agoge was as uniformly brutal as later sources claim, or whether its reputation was amplified by non-Spartan writers uneasy with such total state control. What is clear is that from this moment forward, the battle order was already being rehearsed long before war ever arrived. Hunger becomes a teacher long before an instructor speaks. Meals are deliberately insufficient, not to weaken the body, but to sharpen awareness and suppress complaint. The boys learn to read one another's movements in the dark, to sleep lightly, and to accept pain without display. Every day in the Agoge reinforces the same lesson: the individual exists only insofar as he strengthens the group. This mindset, harsh as it feels, is exactly what later allows a Spartan line to hold when others would waver and you probably wouldn't last. Through the first winter. Historically, this conditioning is reflected in Sparta's performance during the Messenian Wars, especially the Second Messenian War in the 7th century BCE. When prolonged conflict demanded endurance rather than decisive heroics, the Agoge's emphasis on obedience and suffering produced soldiers capable of extended campaigns with minimal logistical support. In battle, this translated into units that did not panic under shortages or exhaustion, a contrast frequently drawn in academic debate with the wealthier but less cohesive forces of Corinth or Argos. The strength of this system lay in emotional regulation. Spartans were trained to suppress fear, not eliminate it, creating a calm, almost mechanical presence within the phalanx. Shields stayed locked, spacing remained tight, and commands were followed even when visibility collapsed. However, the weakness was psychological cost. Ancient sources hint at emotional detachment and reduced adaptability, suggesting that soldiers conditioned to endure might struggle when initiative was required. The skills demanded here were precise: controlled breathing under stress, absolute trust in the man to the left, and the ability to absorb impact without breaking formation. A strange side fact rarely emphasized is that older youths were encouraged to provoke fights among younger ones, not to establish dominance, but to observe who could maintain discipline while angry. Compared to other Greek armies that prized individual athleticism, Spartan forces relied on mutual dependence, a model that modern historians still argue was either brutally efficient or unnecessarily extreme. The Agoge ensured that by the time a man reached the battlefield, fear had already been rehearsed and mastered in the quiet spaces between meals. By adolescence, the body already knows the shape of the formation before the mind names it. Wooden poles replace spears, rough hides stand in for shields, and movement becomes synchronized through repetition rather than explanation. Commands are brief, often wordless, because clarity matters more than flourish. This is where the Agoge quietly transitions from survival training into preparation for the phalanx, embedding battle order into instinct. When the line advances as one, hesitation is not corrected, it is erased. The historical imprint of this training appears clearly in the Battle of Plataea in 479 BCE, where Spartan hoplites maintained formation despite uneven terrain and delayed engagement. Unlike many Greek armies that struggled to keep alignment under pressure, the Spartans advanced with measured pace, shields overlapping, spear points steady. Scholars frequently note that this cohesion was not the result of superior equipment, but of lifelong drilling and collective movement. Compared to the looser formations of Athenian hoplites, Spartan ranks functioned almost as a single organism. The strength here was structural integrity. The Agoge taught soldiers to value the shield wall above personal combat, ensuring that even when individual fighters fell back or stumbled, the formation absorbed the disruption. Yet this focus also introduced limitations. Deep formations required space and predictability. When faced with innovative tactics such as the oblique order later used by Thebes, Spartan rigidity became a liability. The skills required were exacting, precise foot placement, timing one's stride to the man ahead, and maintaining peripheral awareness while facing forward. A lesser-known detail is that Spartans practiced advancing to flute music, not for morale, but to regulate pace and prevent the line from surging unevenly. Academic debate continues over whether this emphasis on uniformity reduced individual initiative, especially when compared to Macedonian phalangites under Philip II, who balanced discipline with tactical flexibility. What cannot be disputed is that by adulthood, the Spartan soldier did not merely join a formation, he completed it. When war finally arrives, it feels strangely familiar. The noise is louder, the stakes are real, but the discipline has already been tested in smaller, colder moments. Orders cut through confusion because they always have, and the line holds because breaking it was never an option. This is where the Agoge reveals its true purpose: not to create fearless warriors, but predictable ones. In the press of battle, predictability is power. The most studied example remains Thermopylae in 480 BCE, where a vastly outnumbered Spartan-led force delayed the Persian advance. The Agoge trained soldiers rotated positions within the narrow pass, maintaining cohesion even as fatigue mounted. This was not reckless heroism, but controlled attrition, buying time through disciplined endurance. Later, at the Battle of Plataea, that same discipline allowed Spartan forces to withstand missile harassment until close combat favored their heavier hoplite formation. Compared to Persian infantry formations, which relied on mobility and volume, Spartan battle order emphasized stability and mutual protection. The strength of this system under combat pressure was resilience. Units did not disintegrate when leaders fell, because authority was distributed through shared training. Yet this also exposed weaknesses. Spartan commanders often adhered strictly to traditional engagement protocols, sometimes delaying action until conditions matched expectation. This hesitation is criticized by some historians, who argue it limited strategic flexibility against unconventional opponents. Soldiers needed more than strength, they required trust, timing, and restraint. Knowing when not to pursue a retreating enemy was as important as knowing how to advance. A lesser-known side fact is that Spartans were discouraged from chasing fleeing foes too far, fearing disorder more than missed kills. Academic debate continues over whether Thermopylae represents the pinnacle or the trap of Spartan ideology, a triumph of discipline, or a warning about inflexibility. Compared to later Roman legions, who emphasized modular maneuvering, Spartan success depended on holding the line perfectly or not at all over time. The very qualities that once defined Spartan dominance began to narrow its options. Discipline remained absolute, but the world around Sparta changed. Enemies learned, adapted, and experimented, while Spartan training stayed largely the same. The Agoge still produced soldiers who could endure, obey, and hold formation. Yet warfare increasingly demanded innovation alongside cohesion. What had once been an advantage slowly hardened into constraint. This tension is most clearly exposed at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE. Facing the Theban army under Epaminondas, Spartan forces encountered a radically different approach, a deepened left wing and an oblique advance designed to shatter elite units rather than match lines evenly. Despite their flawless discipline, the Spartans were overwhelmed where adaptability mattered more than endurance. Scholars frequently cite this battle as proof that the Agoge excelled at producing reliable hoplites, but not commanders capable of rapid tactical evolution. The strength of Spartan training was still formidable. Even at Leuctra, their line did not collapse immediately. It was pushed back through concentrated force rather than panic. However, the weakness lay in over-specialization. The Agoge emphasized uniform excellence within a narrow role, leaving little room for light infantry, integration, cavalry support, or tactical experimentation areas where other Greek states increasingly invested. The required skills remained internal, trust, cohesion, and physical resilience. What was missing was strategic imagination. A lesser-known detail is that Sparta possessed cavalry units, but they were poorly trained and socially undervalued compared to hoplites, reflecting institutional bias shaped by the Agoge. Academic debate continues over whether Sparta could have reformed its system without undermining its identity. Compared to the adaptable Macedonian armies that followed, Spartan forces represented a perfected system optimized for one style of war, exceptional when conditions aligned, vulnerable when they did not. Even as Sparta's power faded, the Agoge refused to disappear quietly. Long after decisive defeats, the system continued to shape identity, memory, and reputation. By the Hellenistic period, Sparta was no longer a dominant military force, yet visitors still came to observe its training rituals. Already semi-symbolic, discipline had become heritage. The battle order remained impressive, but it increasingly belonged to the past rather than the future. Historically, this decline is visible after the Battle of Mantinea in 360 BCE, where Sparta fought competently, but without strategic relevance. The Agoge still produced disciplined hoplites capable of holding formation, but manpower shortages and demographic collapse limited their effectiveness. Unlike earlier wars, discipline alone could not compensate for numerical inferiority. Academic debate often centers on whether the Agoge's rigidity contributed directly to this decline, or whether broader social factors such as citizen population loss were more decisive. The strength of the system at this stage was cultural continuity. Spartan soldiers retained a level of cohesion admired even by rivals, and their presence on the battlefield still commanded respect. The weakness, however, was institutional inflexibility. Training methods rooted in archaic hoplite warfare did not evolve alongside combined arms tactics, emerging elsewhere in Greece. Compared to Roman manipular formations or Macedonian pike phalanxes, Spartan units lacked tactical depth beyond discipline. The skills emphasized remained unchanged: endurance, obedience, and formation integrity. A strange but telling side fact is that by this period, Spartan youths sometimes performed mock Agoge routines for foreign audiences, turning survival training into spectacle. Scholars debate whether this represents decline or conscious myth-making. Compared to other ancient armies that adapted or disappeared, Sparta chose preservation over reinvention. The Agoge had done exactly what it was designed to do: create perfect soldiers for a specific form of war, but history had moved on. The Spartan Agoge was never merely a training program. It was a long-term investment in a single military idea. By shaping discipline from childhood, Sparta produced soldiers uniquely capable of maintaining battle order under pressure, a quality that defined its successes from the Messenian Wars to Thermopylae and Plataea. Few ancient armies could match the cohesion of a Spartan phalanx at its peak, and fewer still could replicate the social machinery that sustained it. In terms of effectiveness, the Agoge succeeded brilliantly within its intended context. It created predictable, reliable hoplites whose strength lay in collective endurance rather than individual brilliance. This made Sparta extraordinarily resilient in set-piece engagements and defensive actions. However, that same predictability limited Adaptation. As warfare evolved, discipline alone proved insufficient against innovation, depth tactics, and combined arms. Compared to other ancient military systems, the Agoge stands out for its intensity and focus, but also for its narrow specialization. Roman legions and Macedonian armies demonstrated that flexibility could coexist with discipline. Sparta chose purity instead. The result was a military culture that achieved legendary status, then gradually fossilized. Ultimately, the Agoge was effective not because it made Spartans invincible, but because it made them consistent. It ensured that when a Spartan line advanced, it did so as one body, one will. That achievement shaped ancient warfare, and its limits offer one of history's clearest lessons. The discipline that wins one era's wars may define the boundaries of the next.